All right, welcome back to the Modern Josephus. And as we go here through Crash Course History, um, reacting to the videos that they have. And man, the last video, there was a lot of stuff I disagreed with there, and a lot of stuff there that they talked about that um, is based on a more of a left wing view of history, missing facts as always. Um, and I mean, almost everything they said about Thomas Jefferson was false in that video. I mean, yes, he did own slaves, but to say that he didn't or wasn't looking to free them is a whole nother level of closing your eyes to the evidence that is in front of you. All right? Thomas Jefferson wasn't a dictator. He lived in a democracy, and in democracies there are certain things that you cannot do, or else you'll be in trouble. There'll be consequences to those things that you do. And um, the problem with a lot of liberals of the left, the way they see history, is that, oh, those people should have been like us today. And if we had lived back then, we would have been the same. No, if you lived in Virginia and you had slaves, you would not have done anything different. Period. You wouldn't. All right. So let's go ahead and watch this one. It's about the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, my favorite, and federalism. All right. And the reason why I like this is going to tie into the Civil War and the view of slavery and states' rights and all this kind of issue, which I'll be discussing as we go on from here. So if you are a Confederate supporter, and you think that the Confederates were right and things like that, I do love to debate on that topic. I have read a lot on the U.S. Civil War politically and, of course, the battles. And I have gone back in the way I view the Civil War. I'm pro-Lincoln, I'm pro-Union. The way I view the Civil War is through the eyes of what happened here in this moment of history with the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, and the idea of federalism. So let's go ahead and click play and let's look at this.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about the United States Constitution.
I used to like polos too. I used to wear them a lot, but I kind of steered away from them. Right.
Constitution. And in doing so, we're going to explore how the American style of government became the envy of the entire world, so much so that everyone else copied us. What's that, Stan? Yep. We're not going to talk about other countries stealing our form of government because no other country stole our form of government? That doesn't seem possible, Stan. No, Stan, not the libertage. Cue the intro.
I will say, he is very humorous, and I feel like even though we disagree and we would disagree on a lot, I feel like we would get along.
So today we're going to learn why the green areas of not America didn't copy us. All right, so as Americans may dimly remember from history classes, the constitutional system we've been living under since 1788, the year of the first presidential election, was not the original American government. The first government set up by the Continental Congress was called the Articles of Confederation, and it was, in a word, bad. In 2 words, it was not good, which is why it only lasted 10 years. The problem with the Confederation is that it wasn't so much a framework for a national government as it was a firm league of friendship, which unfortunately only sounds like a team of Care Bear superheroes. The Articles set up a government that consisted of a one-house body of delegates, with each state having a single vote, who, acting collectively, could make decisions on certain issues that affected all the states. There was no president and no judiciary. You can try to tell me that John Hanson, the president of the Congress, was the first American president, but it's just not true. Any decision required 9 of the 13 congressional votes, which pretty much guaranteed that no decisions would ever be made. Ah, supermajorities, always so efficient. But besides the 2/3 requirement, the Congress was very limited in what it could actually do. The government could declare war, conduct foreign affairs, and make treaties. Basically the stuff you need to do to go to war with England. It could coin money, but it couldn't collect taxes. That was left to the states. So if you needed money to, say, go to war with Britain, you had to ask the states politely. The Articles could be amended, but that required a unanimous vote. vote, so 0 amendments were ever passed. The government was deliberately weak, which followed logically from Americans' fear of tyrannical governments taxing them and quartering soldiers in their houses and so on. But here's the thing, weak government is like non-alcoholic beer. It's useless. That said, the Articles government did accomplish a couple things. First, it won the war, so yay! Unless you were a slave or a Native American, in which case, probable boo. Second, the government developed rules for dealing with one of the most persistent problems facing the new nation. Ohio, which was called the Northwest, presumably because it is north and west of Virginia. Getting control of the land meant taking it from the Indians who were living there, and the Articles government was empowered to make treaties, which it did. Crash Course World History fans will remember the Athenians telling the Melians that the strong do as they can and the weak suffer what they must, and the Americans definitely went to the Athenian school of treaty making. Through treaties signed at Fort Stanwix and Fort McIntosh, the Indians surrendered land north of the Ohio River. The biggest accomplishment of the Articles government was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which set up a process to create 5 new states between the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. 2 things to know about this. First, it acknowledged that American Indians had a claim to the land and that they had to be treated better if settlers wanted to avoid violence. And second, Stan, can I get the foreshadowing filter? Yes, perfect. The ordinance outlawed slavery in all 5 of the new states.
Yes, and that is very important when you're talking about the Civil War, because from this birthed the idea that the Founding Fathers wanted to bring about the end of slavery. And so the reason why they knew that these areas would one day become states, and especially when we get into the Constitution, they wanted more states, but they wanted less slave states with the hope that one day there would be enough non-slave states to be able to change laws on slavery. And this is something that is very important to the lead up of the Civil War, and it shows that those who were trying their hardest to defend the institution of slavery were going against what the Founding Fathers envisioned for America.
States. Still, the Articles government was a complete disaster for exactly one reason: it could not collect taxes. Both the national government and the individual states had racked up massive debt to pay for the war, and their main source of revenue became tariffs, but because Congress couldn't impose them, states had to do it individually. And this made international trade a total nightmare. In fact,
yeah, they borrowed a lot of money from France and the Netherlands. Actually, I think that the Netherlands was their main bank that they owed money to.
Worsened by the British being kind of cranky about us winning the war and therefore unwilling to trade with us.
Interesting picture there. You only see the American delegates to the peace treaty. The British delegates asked to be removed from the pictures.
In 1786 and 1787, the problem got so bad in Massachusetts that farmers rose up and closed the courts to prevent them from foreclosing upon their debt-encumbered farm. This was called Shays' Rebellion after Revolutionary War veteran and indebted farmer Daniel Shays. The uprising was quelled by the state militia, but for many, this was the sign that the Articles government, which couldn't deal with the crisis at all, had to go. But not for everyone. Thomas Jefferson, for instance, was a fan of Shays' Rebellion. A little rebellion now and then is a good thing. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.
So I agree with that. Sometimes you have to actually fight for your liberties and you have to defend your rights. However, come on, if you owe debt, you have to pay it back. All right, you can't just look for free cards. Okay, you can't be like college students and want other people to pay off your debt for you. No, you took that debt, you have to pay it back.
Which is all fine and good, I mean, unless you're the bleeding patriots or tyrants. But to most elites, Shays' Rebellion showed that too much democratic liberty among the lower classes could threaten private property. Also, people who held government bonds were nervous because without tax revenue, they were unlikely to get paid back. And when rich people feel like something has to be done, something is usually done. Let's go to the thought bubble. The first attempt to do something was a meeting in Annapolis in 1786 aimed at better regulating international trade. Only 6 states sent delegates, but they agreed to meet the next year in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation. The delegates who met in Philly the next year had a funny definition of revision, though. Rather than make tweaks to the Articles, they wrote a new charter of government, the Constitution, which is, with some significant alterations, the same one that Americans live under and argue about today.
I think it was James Madison who he got all these people together with the words saying, "Oh yeah, we're just going to amend the Articles of Confederation." But he knew from the very beginning that he wanted a whole new constitution. He had been studying it now for a couple of years. And so what he wanted was to form a whole new government. And when he first introduces the idea, I don't know if it's on the first or second day, oh man, the delegates just, um, some delegates I think left, if I remember right. But yeah, that wasn't a too happy first time that he mentioned it. And he had to go through a whole battle to convince people and convince the delegates that it needed to be done.
Despite what some seem to believe, the 55 men who met in Philadelphia and hammered out a new form of government were not gods, but they were far from ordinary, especially for the time. Most were wealthy, some very much so. More than half had college educations, which was super rare since 0.001% of Americans attended college at the time. About 40% had served in the army during the war. But one thing they all shared was a desire for a stronger national government. The delegates agreed.
And see, that's the thing about the secessionists. And when I say secessionists, I mean the ones right before the Civil War. Their states voluntarily signed on to the Constitution. All right? They held a democratic votes in their assemblies, and their assemblies voted to support a national government. Not a confederacy. They decided to reject a confederacy and embrace a national government.
Agreed on many things. The government should have executive, legislative, and judicial branches and should be Republican with representatives rather than direct democracy. But the devil appeared in the details. Alexander Hamilton, probably the biggest proponent of very strong government, wanted the president and Senate to serve life terms, for example. That idea went nowhere because the overarching concern of almost all the delegates was to create a government that would protect against both tyranny by the government itself and tyranny by the people. They didn't want too much.
That's why we're not a democracy. Democrats. We are a constitutional republic. There's a way to do things. There is some democratic processes, like for instance how representatives are chosen. But as far as the Senate, we need to go back to the Senate being elected by the state legislatures. We need to go back. The states need a voice again to become a republic, because we've tried this democracy stuff and it doesn't work. And I'm not talking about taking away the right to vote from anybody. All right. I still believe that Black Americans, women should still be able to vote for the House of Representatives, just like every other man. But the Senate needs to go back to the state legislatures and must. The states need to be more involved again in the process of our government.
But they also didn't want too much democracy, which is why our presidents are still technically elected not directly by regular people, but by 538 members of the Electoral College. This system is so Byzantine and strange that when American politicians speak of spreading democracy through the world, they never actually advocate for American-style elections. Thanks, Thought Bubble.
But they should. Actually, I take that back. No, we shouldn't be spreading anything to the rest of the world. We need to take care of our own business. And if other parts of the world want to choose democracy, they can. If they want a constitutional republic, they can. If they want all those different things, they can. All right? We need to stay away. We are our own country, and we will take care of our own business.
Yes, I know. You have fantastic elections in Canada. Yeah, right, okay, all that too. I get it. Okay, it's U.S. history, Thought Bubble. So conflicts between competing interests arose quickly at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the first being between states with big populations and those with small populations. Large states.
And this is important for the reason why we have the Electoral College. All right? Yes, I'm looking at you people who want to get rid of it. Yeah, you.
States supported James Madison's Virginia plan, which called for a two-house legislature with representation in both proportional to a state's population, and smaller states, fearing that the big boys would dominate, rallied behind the New Jersey plan. New Jersey. This called for a single legislative house with equal representation for each state, as with the Articles of Confederation. But of course, coming from New Jersey, it had no chance of succeeding, and sure enough, it didn't. Instead, we got the Great Compromise, brokered by Connecticut's Roger Sherman, which gave us two houses. A House of Representatives with representation proportional to each each state's population, and a Senate with 2 members from each state. House members, also called congressmen, served 2-year terms, while senators served 6-year terms, with 1/3 of them being up for election in every 2-year cycle. The House was designed to be responsive to the people, while the Senate was created to never pass anything, and it was so masterfully designed that it still works to this day. However,
So the Senate was there to represent the interests of the states. All right, I don't know why he decided to skip that, but that's what it was for.
Solution created another problem: who should be counted in terms of representation? Slaveholding states wanted slaves to count toward their population.
Yes, you know why? Because they wanted to keep slavery.
Even though, of course, they could not vote because they were property. States with few slaves argued that slaves shouldn't be counted as people because, just to be clear, none of these dudes were not racist.
It's not that they shouldn't be counted as people. They shouldn't be counted for representation. All right? All these people knew that they were people. All right? That's why in the Constitution they don't call them anything but, I think it's enslaved persons or something, but they give them personhood. So thank you, John Green, for trying to hide that fact, but that's just a plain fact. All right? It's not that they didn't see them as people. It's that they didn't see them as a good reason to give the South more representation. All right? And if this compromise had not been done, the South would have been able to have more congressmen, more people in Congress. They would have had more seats in Congress and would have been able to keep slavery a lot longer.
This issue was solved with the notorious 3/5 compromise. For the purpose of determining the population, the total number of white people plus 3/5 the population of other persons, the word slave was never used, would be the basis for the calculation.
See? Persons. So what this guy is saying about how they didn't see them as persons, what in the world? Come on, get out of here. Pay attention. Read. Stop contradicting yourself.
So, yeah, that's still in the Constitution. The Constitution also contains a fugitive...
And we also don't have slavery anymore. Not chattel slavery.
Slave clause requiring any escaped slave to be returned to their master. And this meant that a slave couldn't escape slavery by moving to a state where slavery was outlawed, which meant that on some level, some states couldn't enforce their own laws. Spoiler alert, this becomes problematic. But except for the tyranny of slavery, the framers really hated tyranny. To avoid tyranny of the government, the Constitution embraced 2 principles: separation of powers and federalism. The government was divided into 3 branches: legislative, executive, and judiciary. And the Constitution incorporated checks and balances. Each branch can check the power of the others. The legislature can make laws, but the president can veto those laws. The judiciary can declare laws void too, but that's a power they had to grant themselves. You won't find it in the Constitution. I promise, you can look for it. And federalism is the idea that governmental authority rests both in the national and the state governments.
And I believe that Marbury versus Madison, was it? Marbury versus something. I believe that was a wrong decision. I agree with Jefferson that, yeah, that decision was not a constitutional decision, and it probably should be overturned sometime.
As an American, I am a citizen both of the United States and of the state of Indiana. And the national government...
Oh, wow, shout out to Indiana. He's a Hoosier, too. We both disagree, obviously, but wow. 2 Hoosiers right there.
The one set up by the Constitution is supposed to be limited in scope to certain enumerated powers. Most other powers, especially the protection of health, safety, and morals, are left to the states. But the Constitution...
Yes. Did you notice that he said health, safety, and morals? So all moral issues are under the 10th Amendment, given to the states to decide. Slavery was a state issue. That's a moral issue. It belongs to the states. Even Lincoln recognized that. And we can come to today, all right? This is why abortion, transgenderism, and any other moral issue belongs to the states, to the people of that state to decide. The majority, the democratic part of this republic is that the people decide in each state how they want to go forward on moral issues.
Also seeks to protect against the radicalism that too much democracy can bring. The mostly rich framers worried that the people, many of whom were poor and indebted, might vote in congresspeople or, God forbid, a president in favor of, redistribution of property. To hedge against this, senators were elected by the states, usually by state legislatures, and they were supposed to be leading citizen types. You know, the kind of good Americans who take bribes and have adulterous affairs in airport bathrooms and patronize prostitutes and shoot Alexander Hamilton. Anyway, the other hedge against too much democracy is the aforementioned electoral Electoral College, which many Americans hate because it has the potential to elect a president who did not win the popular vote. But that's kind of the point. The electors were supposed to be prominent, educated men of property who were better able to elect a president than, like, the rabble. But the Constitution...
And actually, well, each state was different in how they had their electoral college vote. In some states, I read, like in Louisiana, I read this from the book Three Roads to the Alamo, and it was focused on Jim Bowie, and Jim Bowie was an elector at one point, and what he did was he ran against another elector. One represented one president, the other one represented the other president, and between those two, whoever got the most votes meant that they would vote for that president in the election. So it was set up differently in different places.
The United States is a really impressive document, especially when you consider its longevity. I mean, as Crash Course World History fans will remember, the nation-state is pretty new on the historical scene, and the United States established by the Constitution is actually one of the oldest ones. But the
So there you go. Nationalism is not wrong. It's deeply rooted, and it may not be as long as, well, it's been around. I mean, it's been around since medieval era, at least, when it started popping up, and it's just gotten stronger and stronger. And so there's nothing wrong with nationalism. Now, when you do white nationalism, black nationalism, any nationalism based on color of skin, then that's when the issues happen.
The Constitution would be meaningless if it hadn't been ratified, which it was, but not without a fight that helped clarify America's political ideology. 9 out of the 13 states were required to ratify the Constitution, and special conventions called for the purpose. In order to convince the delegates to vote for it, 3 of the framers, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, wrote a series of 85 essays that together are known as the Federalist Papers.
And again, it was democratically chosen, all right? So the people elected people to the legislatures, and these legislatures voted on this Constitution.
Taken together, they're a powerful and ultimately persuasive argument for why a strong national government is necessary and ultimately not a threat to people's liberty. Oh, it's time for the...
Okay, but it wasn't... See, this is where you have to really get into the weeds here. It was stronger than the Articles of Confederation, for sure. It definitely was stronger. It had to be. But overall, if you look at it, there is a very good balance of power between the interests of states, of individual, of following the laws, executing the laws, creating the laws. A very, very good balance of power. And that's what they were striving to do. It wasn't just about creating a government to overpower the states, all right? No, they were looking for balance.
Mystery document? The rules here are simple. If I name the author of the mystery document, shock as in surprise. If I don't, shock as in... Alright, Stan, let's see what we got here. If circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people while there is a large body of citizens, little, if at all, inferior to them in discipline and the use of arms, who stand ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. This appears to me the only substitute that can be devised for a standing army and the best possible security against it, if it should exist.
So if you want to understand the Constitution and why it was signed and what each what the articles and things like that are for, and what it encompasses and how much it encompasses as far as rights go, like here when it's talking about the Second Amendment, read the Federalist Papers, because this is from the Federalist Papers. I think this one is from Alexander Hamilton, if I'm right. We'll see. I'm going to guess that it's him. But, yes. So, read the Federalist Papers. And in there, it will explain very clearly what the amendments mean, what the different parts of the Constitution means, etc.
Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton.
Yep,
yes! Too easy, Stan, although I appreciate the opportunity for a rant. The whole idea of the Second Amendment was that the people could protect themselves from a standing army by being equally well armed, yep. Which these days would mean not that citizens should have the right to buy assault rifles, but that they should have the right to buy, yep, like, unmanned drones.
And I still believe that. We should be able to own tanks. bazookas, anything. Anything that our government's army can have, we should be able to have. And think about this. You know, a lot of people say, oh, we live in a systemically racist country. Well, if it's systemically racist and you're saying that the government still has all this racist influence that is going after certain races, then don't you think that those races should be armed with the same weapons that that racist government has so that they can defend themselves on equal ground?
And arguably suitcase nukes. And by the way, in the Constitution, this is not listed as a privilege, it is listed as a right. And
that is correct. And so if health is going to be a right and we're supposed to be provided health care, then the right to bear arms is a right and the government should provide us with tanks and bazookas. There you go. Take that to the bank.
as a right, if I can't afford my own Predator drone, I guess the government should buy one for me. It's almost as if Alexander Hamilton had no way of knowing that weaponry would one day advance past the musket.
Oh no. The point isn't, oh, how so should we take away the ability of the government to own drones and own nuclear weapons and own machine guns so that then the citizenry and the government can be equal. That way the government doesn't overpower the people. See? So as long as the government is going to have all those high capacity weapons, we the people need them too in order to defend ourselves against against any possible dictator who wants to use it. And that's what I don't understand about people on the left, is they keep on saying, oh, Donald Trump is a wannabe dictator and it's dangerous. Well, if he is a potential wannabe dictator and you really fear that, then you should be for the people being able to have access to tanks and any other means to defend themselves in case he becomes a dictator and tries to use the army against political opponents. So you guys should be pro Second Amendment. Anyway.
Yes, you know how Alexander Hamilton died? Gunshot! Sorry, I had to. I am on a roll. So it would be easy to ignore the people who opposed the Constitution because, you know, they lost. But some of the ideas of these so-called anti-federalists were particularly powerful and they deserve a bit of attention. Anti-federalists, unlike the mostly wealthy federalists, were usually supported by common people, small farmers who weren't as involved in commercial activity. They saw less need for a strong national government that would foster trade and protect creditors. And the anti-federalists
I don't know, Patrick Henry, a leader of the Anti-Federalists, he was kind of wealthy.
We're very afraid of a strong government, especially one dominated by the wealthy. Writers like James Winthrop held that a large group of United States would be like an empire, and that no extensive empire can be governed upon republican principles. As evidence, he could point to Britain, or all the way back to Rome. Smaller, more local governments are more responsive to the people and better able to protect their rights. To the Anti-Federalists, that meant state governments. And while ultimately the Federalists won out and the Constitution was ratified, the issue of how large government should be did not go away. So the Constitution was really only a starting point. It's a vague document, and the details would be worked out in the political process, and then on the battlefield.
The point is, though, is that it was still approved by those states. So the Anti-Federalists lost. I will say that I have not read any of the Anti-Federalist writings. Perhaps because they lost, so kind of doesn't matter. But maybe someday I'll look into it. But at the end of the day, their ideas then went out. The Federalist ideas went out, and they created a government that was approved by all 13 states eventually. Of course, Rhode Island took its time to approve it, and actually they were kind of economically forced by the other 12 states to do so. You should read up on it sometime. It's pretty interesting how they forced Rhode Island to finally accept the Constitution. But yeah, so at the end of the day, every state voted for it by slim margins sometimes, but it still passed.
Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Muller.
All right, so that was great. One thing they failed to mention is because they, secularist history doesn't like to mention, God or anything else. But Benjamin Franklin, the great deist, and as John Green pointed out in the last video, deists believe that God created and then left his creation to go on its way. So, and doesn't interfere in how the world goes on and moves on. So the great deist Benjamin Franklin, when he saw all the rigmarole and all the fighting going on in the Constitutional Convention on the first day, stood up and said, "Let us pray to God to help guide us through this process." So, if Ben Franklin was still a deist at that point, I know in his autobiography he calls himself a deist when he was a young man, but if at this point in the Constitutional Convention, if he is still a deist, he is a hypocritical deist, or even a, there's another word for it. Oh, I can't. It's not coming for me. But he's not falling in line with his deism. Okay, he's asking for God's guidance in this process. Now you tell me, how deistic is that? It's not. All right. So I don't know if at some point, the way I view it is, as he got older, I started thinking about what comes after death. He may have started leaving his deistic ideas. Maybe he saw, like Washington saw, the divine hand of providence moving through the country. But Ben Franklin also signed a document of the Declaration of Independence where it says that they call upon divine providence to help them in this, to realize their independence. So yeah, he basically became a heretic of deism. All right, if to use religious terms. So that's all I have for today. Please like, share, subscribe. We'll see you in the next video. I'm thinking about tonight uh, doing something different here and actually playing some Total War. If you think that that's a great idea, I have Total War. I think I'm going to do Total War American Revolution just because we're doing this in U.S. history. So I'm going to do Total Empire, Total War, and we'll do the American Revolution campaign, so, or historical campaign. So we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and have a good day at work, wherever or whatever else you are going to do. Adios.